Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Bill Cowan, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of People in Transition. Ever since we've started chatting with one another on LinkedIn, I've just been fascinated with you, your background, the experiences that you have, and all the things that you can share with us today.
Well, I'm looking forward to it very much as well, Bob. I'm sure we're going to have some fun, and I hope we'll be able to talk about some things that are really important.
Bill, one of the things that I ask each of my guests when they're on is, when you were a child and thinking about your life, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, Bob, that's a really good question because I don't know that I really had a clear view at all of what I wanted to do. I was very fortunate. I had good education and I was a good mathematician. So I actually sort of followed a trail which went to engineering school. And I found very quickly that I didn't want to be an engineer. So my life has kind of evolved as I went along, and I've had probably 3 or 4 different careers, as a matter of fact. And it's only recently that I've become really interested in the career transition issues.
Bill, why don't you talk about some of those transitions you experienced, and did you do them well?
Some of them were quite straightforward because I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to Harvard, and then part of the scholarship was I couldn't work in the US, so I went to the UK, which is a whole new experience for me. Worked there for 4 years, and then moved back to New York. So I had transitions within my job, and then I transitioned again to Australia, where I grew up. And at some point, I decided I had to leave consulting because you don't control your own life, your own time. I took the view, why don't I try to be a chief executive? If I wish I had my book back then because I would have done this much better. But I went out and I started to talk to people about what's it take to be a chief executive. And I was very fortunate. I met some people who wanted to help me do that. And so then I was a chief executive of a media company for 10 years. Following that, I became involved in career transition, and I was a total change in my job, except that I was managing a business that had offices all through Southeast Asia. But I had to learn new tricks at that point, new ideas, and I found I loved working with people on career issues. And so I've done that ever since.
And Bill, you've mentioned to me before that people don't oftentimes even have a clue about identifying their strengths or knowing what their strengths really are. How can you coach someone to be better at that?
Well, it's really important that you sell yourself based, first of all, that you understand your strengths, and then secondly, that you can communicate them effectively and briefly. Some people think you've got to communicate your passion in 8 seconds, for instance. The actual analysis of these statistics out there show that most people don't really understand their strengths at all. And they confuse a job title with a strength, for instance. But there was an amazing statistic, I thought, which was that 98% of leaders interviewed by Stanford Business School thought they were above average leaders. Now, we know statistically that can't be true, but that's the kind of thing that happens. People overestimate their strengths until they're forced to take a view on what is this a particular strength? What is their particular strength? strengths, and then they sort of go silent, or they make stuff up. They haven't validated it, they haven't tested it, they haven't asked other people what they think their strengths are. It's really not compelling at all when they talk about their strengths.
So do you think that asking someone, what are my strengths, Bill, is that the best way to go about it? Or talk to me in terms of how can I find out what my strengths are?
Well, it's first of all, strengths can be, they may not be functional skills, they may be behaviors, they may be your interests, it may be your hobbies, all sorts of things can be a strength. I ask my candidates, the people I work with, to write a very simple email to 10 people who have worked with them and seen them at their best. Ask them 4 questions and explain that they're working with a coach and that the coach would like to understand what other people thought their strengths were. And then there's 4 areas. First of all, what are my strengths about the way I think? Secondly, the way I work with other people, particularly teams. The third thing is the way I communicate. And the fourth thing is anything else, which can be integrity, fun, all sorts of different things. So a very, very simple request. And the results are simply amazing to most people and gives them, by the way, a huge confidence boost to find that other people see them having these strengths.
I think that would be a great exercise for people to go through, not only during their job transition, but periodically just doing that, because you could create your own development plan based on what you hear back, right?
Yes, that's quite true. It's in fact, I have a couple of candidates who've done that after they've gone into the job and been there about a year or two. They double check what people see as their strengths, because we want people to go from good to great, not from mediocre to average. You're not trying to fix issues that people might think you have. You're trying to build on your strengths all the time. And when you build on your strengths, then you flourish.
Bill, one of the things that I know that you're very keen to talk about and you've done a lot of thinking about is the need to build your own network and the power of meeting new people. Talk to me about that a little bit, please.
Well, the statistics seem to show that somewhere about 80% of jobs come from people in your network or people who are somehow part of your extended network. The weird thing that most people don't understand is that jobs don't come from people you know. They come from people you're introduced to by people who you know. And in fact, there's some academic work has been done on this, which in effect shows that it's the third layer of people. I call them the A list, the B list, and the C list. And the A list are people who you know, and they could be anyone, by the way. If you're a student, they can be your professor. They can be uncle, your aunt, your parents, the people you've worked with at McDonald's. That's the A list. They have seen you working, and they know what you like. So, and most of them want to help you. But the interesting thing is jobs come not from the A list, but from the C list. So the A list need to introduce you to people they know, and then the people they know need to introduce you to the next layer out, the C list. And it's just incredible how this works. I've had one person who went back to their previous boss. The boss introduced them to a consulting firm. The consulting firm introduced them to one of their clients, and the client hired them. So it's, in my experience at least, it's very, very common for the third ring from the center, that's you, to generate the work. And even if they don't give you a job, they could be a recruiter who helps you find a job. So it's really important to expand your network because of this fact that most people don't understand, that something like 80% of jobs come either from your extended network or from people who help you as part of your network.
I have a client, Bill, that said, that networking, that's just a dirty word. That's just what those insurance sales guys do or used car salesmen. And that's just not for me. How would you coach that person?
Well, you can't go out and talk to someone and not know what you're talking about. Some people say you should have lots of coffees. My approach is, no, that's not right. You should be having lots of working sessions to test your thinking. And you can't just meet people and say, I don't have a job and I don't know what I'm doing. Have you got any ideas? They will not have any ideas. The first problem with that approach is that you can't ask for a job. People freeze when you ask them, do you have any ideas about a job for me? My mantra is seek advice and you'll get a job, and seek a job and you'll get advice. So it's no good talking to people about, I'd like you to find me a job. That won't work. But if you test your thinking, I'm really interested in learning more about a particular business or industry or type of person, then they will normally talk a lot because people love giving advice. So you need to ask for advice, but you need to frame the problem. People can't respond well if they don't know what you're trying to explore. So quite a lot of the preparation for networking is, what kind of questions will I ask? What am I trying to achieve? And how will I know that I've made progress in the meeting?
And Bill, is this networking somehow different now that so much is done online and LinkedIn and Zoom and so forth? Is it different somehow?
Yes. I believe that LinkedIn is a huge way to help you, and it's through your second connections. For instance, I looked at the company Siemens, and I found that there's 1.5 million employees or people who'd been at Siemens. And I then looked for my first connections, and I found I had a few first connections, but I wasn't close to them. But then I looked at my second connections, and I found I had 20,000 second connections. So my network somehow knows 20,000 people in Siemens. And one of them was the chairman of Siemens, which is a German company, as you know. So there's no way in the world I would have realized that someone in my network could introduce me to the chair of Siemens. That's the power of LinkedIn. You have to have a certain number of connections yourself. You can't have 10 connections. You need several hundred, ideally. But once you have several hundred connections in your LinkedIn connected to you, then you will find that these people are connected in all sorts of ways that you have no idea about.
And I coach my clients and say that networking is as much about giving as it is receiving. What does that mean to you, Bill?
Well, I think that's extremely good advice. You need to be offering to help. For instance, with a recruiter, if you meet a recruiter, you should be offering to help them find someone who they would like to meet. So it can't be a one-way process. You do need to offer to help people, and they'll be very grateful because not too many people do offer to help them. So it's unusual. And that goes also with another idea, which is it's very, very good to say thank you. It's surprising how few people say thank you when they've received some help from someone.
Bill, let's go back to that needing to understand what makes you special and how do you communicate that? Let's say you're coaching one of your clients in terms of that communication, and they say, oh, that sounds like I'm bragging. That sounds like I'm, again, selling snake oil. Bill, I just don't know as I can do that. How do you help that person get over that feeling?
Yes, I agree with you entirely that it's not good to tell people what you think makes you special. You need to talk about what other people think makes you special. And that's why this email asking for input is so powerful, because you can say, this is the feedback I've received. I like to be able to say, if you ask people I've worked with what makes me special, then they will point to 3 things. And then you've got to think hard about what are those 3 things and how can you explain them and can you do it very briefly. It's not a good strategy to talk about what makes you special. People won't believe it. What evidence do you have to support what you're saying? You need validation. And a lot of people fail to validate what they're talking about.
Are there things that you should not share about yourself if you're meeting someone in these informational interviews or you're interviewing for a position? Are there topics that you should stay away from about yourself?
Well, I have a problem when people ask you, what are your development needs? Because we don't know what our development needs are in relation to the new job, unless it's an obvious one. I need to be a mathematician and I don't know anything about math. That's a problem. The chances are you're not going to get that job anyhow. If it's not a strength already, that's an issue. But I do think some people are tempted to sort of talk at some length about all the problems they've got. You've got to accentuate the positive, not the negative. You've got to be very careful not to be self-deprecating. There is another school of thought, of course, which is that it's good to be authentic and talk about your weaknesses. But I personally believe you should keep away from that, and you should talk about your strengths, and you should have a positive attitude. You should, instead of saying I've only done that once, you should say I have done that once and I'm very confident I can excel in that area.
Bill, you've talked to me before about 3 key questions and that you should think through these questions and how you might respond to them. The 3 questions: what do you do? Can you tell me about yourself? And what do you want to do? When you're coaching your clients through these 3 questions, what do you tell them?
Well, I think you've got to answer that first question very quickly. The right answer is not that I've got some particular job in some company. It's more about your purpose. What am I doing on earth? What am I trying to do to help other people, if possible? I give the example of I think it was President Kennedy talking to a cleaner at Cape Canaveral, but asked him what he did. It was pretty obvious he was a cleaner, but he said, I'm helping the American people put a man on the moon by keeping this facility spotless. So he was talking more about his purpose. That's what I think you need to do when you answer that first question. What do you do? What's your purpose? You have to think hard about how you would answer that, but that should be answered very quickly, 8 seconds or less. And it shouldn't be, what's your job? That's not the right answer as far as I'm concerned. Can you tell me about yourself? Well, this is a very, very important question because this is used by most people as an icebreaker to get the meeting going. And if they don't use that, I think you should volunteer to tell them about yourself. And I have 3 parts to that. I call it PEC. I want you first to talk about what you're passionate about. Secondly, what your experience is. And thirdly, what makes you special, your competencies. And I want you to do it within 2 minutes. So this is much, much harder than most people sort of anticipate. And most people can talk at length about this topic if you give them a chance. So it's a really difficult discipline to rehearse. And the words are really important because it's only 2 minutes, so every word counts. And my approach to it is to say that I'm passionate about leading teams that deliver certain results because I want to show that my candidates are leaders. Everyone's a leader in their own way, and I would like them to articulate that. And then I'd like them to say I've been able to use that, my skill at building teams, in various places over the last 10 years. I've got one person I'm working with right now who's worked in the government and has worked in the private sector. So that's his answer is very brief, that I've worked in the public sector and the private sector, and I've delivered great impact in both jobs. The whole story, by the way, has got to be related to your impact, not what your jobs are, but what difference have you made in your career or in your university time or at school? What difference have you made? And then that moves to the third area, which is what makes me special. And this is where I say, if you ask the people I've worked with what makes me special, they will talk about 3 things: my ability to formulate a strategy and then deliver results, my ability to attract high caliber people, coach them and help them to be high performers, and thirdly, my ability to persuade and communicate and negotiate. So it's a very quick, 2 minutes flies by. Then the third question is, what do you want to do? That's another very tricky question, which everyone will ask you, particularly if they understand that you're looking for a job in some way. And the first answer, I think, is I want to meet more people. I'm trying to expand my network. I'd like to meet senior people or people in these areas that are likely to be helpful to me in understanding what it's like to be in a particular industry or a particular company or a particular job. And then secondly, as you progress, as you meet more people, because I'd like you to meet 50 people, which sounds almost impossible, but it's actually quite easy once you get people to introduce you. Then I'd like to meet people who really could be a role model for me, for instance, have done the things I've done and then have gone on to do other things. And you can use LinkedIn again here, by the way, to find people who could be role models for you. It's a question that everyone will ask you, what do you want to do? And the wrong answer is probably that I want to have a particular job. The right answer is more that I want to contribute in a certain area. It's not what do I want to be? For instance, let's say a policeman. It's really what do I want to do? I want to help society in some way. And that gives you a lot more options than just being a police officer, for argument's sake.
Bill, I'm confused in terms of that second one. Meet people that can be my role model. Why would that be important in your job search?
Well, I believe it's more than just the job that you're looking for. It's really your whole career. You're trying to work out, where's all this heading? And if you look after yourself these days, you're going to live into your 80s, and you might well be working into your 70s. So I'm trying to understand who could be doing things that would be a good learning experience for me. I believe most people don't aim high enough. So a role model is someone who has achieved some things that I think are special, or things that I would like to achieve. I was asked by a young man, why should I meet people that I don't know and who don't have jobs? Well, my answer is because they might know people who will have jobs, and they may have ideas that you just hadn't thought of before that would lead you to a job that could actually be really exhilarating, where you could thrive, and you just hadn't even considered it.
Bill, in your book, you talk about 3 things that could go wrong if you don't think about them and then rehearse them out loud. Remembering what you want to say, being sharp and to the point, and making sure you are passionate enough. Can you talk just a little bit about what each of those mean?
Yes. A lot of people write down what they want to say and then they read it, particularly if they're on Zoom. You can tell immediately when someone's reading something. We've got to speak from the heart. That's why I actually, with this question, tell me about yourself, I want to start with what are you passionate about? I want you to speak from your heart and not just go through 20 jobs that you've had. So it's surprising how you need to rehearse. What we don't understand, most of us, is that professionals rehearse constantly. I was talking to an opera singer, and she rehearses 200 times before she performs. Now, you'd be lucky to find someone in business who rehearsed more than twice. So I'm saying you've got to rehearse because every word counts, and you better understand how it comes out. You could be talking about exactly the same topic, and it can sound very flat, or it can sound exciting. You need to be exciting. You need to be transmitting energy. The listener needs to be delighted with what they're hearing, because you're trying to get them to vote for you. And you can't bore someone into voting for you. So we do need to be very careful that we're not going to bore someone. And too many of us do that. We're flat. We don't really generate any excitement. The second thing, being sharp and to the point, is most people get carried away and talk too much. It's much better to be very clear and very brief. And this is not only true, by the way, in your verbal communication, but in your writing. Some people get carried away and they write everything they can think of in their CV. That's not helpful. No one's going to read it. The average CV, I'm told, is read for less than 16 seconds. In fact, I think I heard recently someone said most recruiters read them for less than 6 seconds. So the point is, you've got to be brief and you've got to hit people between the eyes with your strengths. And if you get carried away and write too much, it's not going to be a good solution. People won't even read it. That goes for your CV, it goes for your LinkedIn profile, and an answer to a question in an interview should be less than 2 minutes. My view is that no answer should be longer than 2 minutes, and you can finish up your answer by asking, have I answered your question? Would you like me to expand on what I've said? Are there any areas of interest you'd like me to talk more about? Those kind of things. So finish your answer with a question. And then making sure you're passionate enough. Well, in a way, I've spoken about that. But if you're rehearsed, then you're confident. Even Pavarotti, even the greatest singers, rehearse. I was amazed to hear that the presenters on TED Talks, they rehearse for 50 hours. So every word is rehearsed. And that's why they can be passionate. That's why they can handle anything that happens while they're speaking. They don't miss a beat. And you've got to be in the same boat, and you've got to be able to transmit energy. You can't bore someone into hiring you. So you've got to be interesting. And I say you've got to be a leader who can talk about what impact they've had, who has got energy, and who you can see has got good judgment. That's the four things I'd like you to project.
You know, as you were talking about that, talking too much or writing too much, as a recruiter, I can say that when someone is talking too much, they are either trying to oversell or they are somehow fearful, and they're covering up that fearfulness with lots of words. That's great coaching, I think, on your part to get to the point.
Yes, and I think some people worry if there's a silence. Let's say you as a recruiter have asked a question, then there's a silence. They feel obliged to fill the silence. That's a mistake. They should just let the silence continue until the other person asks a question. I do suggest that if you suddenly realize you've talked too much, you should say, hey, I've probably taken a bit too long to answer this question. Let me ask you whether I have done a good job or not. So that's stop. Don't dig yourself into a deeper hole. The first law of holes is stop digging if you're in a hole.
Bill, in your book, you talk about 7 guiding principles that underlie job search success. Can you, in our last few minutes here, briefly discuss those 7 principles?
Yes. The first one is leave well. And actually, even if you're a university student, leaving the university well is a good thing. You want people to support you, people who know you to support you. And I don't know that I handled this particularly well when I was younger. I was very independent, so I didn't really think too much about who is going to vote for me, who is out there who respects me and who will help me. But leaving well, particularly if you're in a job where there's been some kind of a problem, rather than having a punch up, I would prefer to move on and try to get people to help me. The aim high it's no good aiming low and hitting your target. That's not a good answer from my point of view. Aiming high, you may aim for the stars and you may only hit the moon, but that's a lot better than aiming for the house next door and hitting the pavement. So you've got nothing to lose by aiming high, but you do need to validate with people who know you that this is not totally crazy. If you say, I'd like to be a chief executive in 5 to 10 years' time, you need some support for this from people who have got good judgment. Prepare thoroughly. I believe most people don't prepare enough. And then they complain that they're having a terrible struggle finding a job. The analogy I use is that this is a marathon and you need a lot of preparation for a marathon. And yet most people walk around the block twice in preparation. They don't prepare themselves properly, either physically or emotionally or intellectually or spiritually for what is going to be a difficult process. Most people have difficulty in this process of finding jobs. So prepare thoroughly. Don't just walk around the block twice. Build warm relationships. What you're trying to do is generate votes. You want people to vote for you. It's a bit like the Oscars. You could produce an incredibly good movie, but you don't win an Oscar. Why? Because the Academy has got to vote for you. And you're in the same boat. If the recruiting person doesn't vote for you, if the line manager doesn't vote for you, if the CEO doesn't vote for you, you won't get the job. So you've got to think about this whole process in terms of how do I generate votes? And a big factor there is building warm connections. That's what gets you a job, not being, a nuclear physicist necessarily. It's more about relationships. Don't seek a job, seek advice. Well, we've talked a little bit about that. People freeze up if you ask them for a job. And it's also difficult to introduce you to someone when they're told you're looking for a job. You always want a warm introduction, by the way, never a cold call. But the introducer could be, the person could refuse the introducer because they say, oh, look, I don't know any jobs that person could get. It's pointless me meeting them. So we don't talk about seeking a job. We say, I met this person. I really think that they've got incredible skills and I think they would benefit greatly from your advice. That's the way I'd like to introduce someone. Expand your network. Well, I've already talked about this, but I would like you to meet 50 people. And it's clearly more than the next job. It's really going forward in life, because you don't know when these people could help you. But there's not one-off meetings. You've got to try to build relationships with them. And finally, validate your thinking. Too many people make up stuff and then sort of talk about it, and they don't really have any validation. So it's no good when you can't support what you're saying. We need evidence. We need to be able to say, I have spoken to my referees. I personally like you to speak to your referees at the very beginning, test your thinking with them, and then be able to say, I've tested my thinking with my referees and they agree. I could be a CEO down the track if I could find the right pathway there, and I could add real value in these industries. So if you can validate your thinking before you start networking, you actually are much stronger. You feel much more confident, and you've got people that you can refer to.
Bill, do you have any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone who's going through their own transition?
Well, I think Carol Dweck and Mindset is a very good book, but I'm a big believer in positive mindset. How can you develop a positive mindset? You can overcome almost all difficulties if you've got a positive mindset. But if you have a fixed mindset and believe that you've maxed out and that the world's against you and you can't really make progress, that's a very difficult place to be. So I think Mindset by Carol Dweck, who's was a professor at Berkeley, is a very good book because it makes you think about what's my potential and how can I fulfill that potential.
I mentioned to Bill earlier that his book, Building a Winning Career, is an outstanding resource. I've been doing recruiting and transition management stuff for 40 some years, and his book is as comprehensive and impactful in terms of your search as anything I've ever read. So I would recommend that one for you as well.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I concentrate on life skills. The odd thing is that a lot of the things I'm talking about are life skills, and you would think that everyone would know about them, but in fact, no, universities and schools don't teach them. And in fact, the reason I can talk about them is that I've worked with 1,000 people, so I know a lot about what goes wrong and what goes right, and also how to frame things to make progress.
Bill, as we wind down here, if our listeners remember just 3 things from today, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away?
Well, the first is to prepare, and you need to understand what to prepare and how to prepare, and that's actually not so easy. It's much more than just writing a CV, and that's what I've tried to tackle in my book, really. How do you prepare for this process? Then you need to validate what you're thinking and also ask for help. Not enough people ask for help. Most people will want to help you, but they don't know how to help you. So you need to frame the problem in a way that allows them to help you if you ask for help. And then third, I believe you have to rehearse, because what you're thinking and what you're writing, it doesn't come out of your mouth the same way. And you have to say it out loud. You have to look at your iPhone and test, am I answering questions succinctly, briefly, and am I keeping to the point? So they're the 3 things that I would say you could start with.
Bill, one of the goals of my podcast is that someone listens to it, they can implement several things starting Monday to help them find their next great job easier and faster. You gave many, many examples of that, and I want to thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Bob. My goal is really to help people, because there isn't, as you pointed out at the beginning, as far as I can find, there's no other book that really tackles the problem in quite the same way that I tackle it. There's plenty of people who talk about facets of it. How do you write a CV? How do you prepare for an interview? That sort of thing. But there's no one who sets it all out as a process. Maybe it's my engineering training, but in my view, this is a process. And if you use the right process, you will be successful.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.